Okay, we're back for another one of these Spy reviews. King, Queen, King is the board today, which is very similar to King, King 3, which was yesterday's board. That's not what I want. This is what I want. So, really on a pace for one of these a day. Actually, let me see. So this is the node locked sim. I haven't saved yet because I'm lazy. I won't spoil the strat that I've node locked. But yeah, my plan was to do one of these boards a week. Right now I'm doing one a day, which is obviously ahead of schedule, but still just kind of like, if I was a high stakes player, this wouldn't be enough. But working through these, I'm motivated. It'd be great to have, how many boards did I say? I have 12? I have 11 boards. It would be great to just like, if I had a week and I just did all 11 boards in a week and a half, like, I would consider that a major win. Because it'd be way ahead of schedule. Anyway, so King, King, Queen, Rainbow. Same thing as last time. Both positions have a small bet and a big bet of 1/3 pot and 80% pot. Both players have raise sizes of 75% pot. We're playing a no rake, no ante game where under the gun has raised to 3 big blinds, the button has flatted, and the blinds have folded. So there's 7.5 blinds in the pot, and we're 100 blinds deep. Quick look at the ranges, same as last time, last few videos. This is a 15% under the gun range. Obviously things will change based on rake and the format and the environment you're playing in. And in position, the button is a very tight and condensed button range of very linear suited connectors, pocket pairs, and some hands that are 3-bet bluffs. And yeah, let's dive right on into it. Again, just a King, King 3. If in position, or if under the gun raiser was to pick 3 cards and have it be the flop, I think oftentimes it would be something like King, King, Queen, Rainbow, or Ace, Ace, King, Rainbow, because that board is just so unbelievably good for the under the gun range. If you can imagine all of the sets and overpairs and trips and quads that at a position can have that the button range simply doesn't. This is one of those boards that just drills it, right? Their total equity is 60 chips, or 60%, and their chips, the EV is 54 chips, which is over 2/3 of the pot, which is pretty insane. So we're over realizing our equity even, which is pretty cool because, you know, hands like 8-7 suited or ace deuce suited just kind of get to bet and fold out. Hands that are like Jack 10 suited, that are ahead or flipping, you know, have pretty good equity against us. So yeah, this board is really good for out of position. A lot of its hands just kind of have a lock on the hand already. Hands like queens, hand like kings, hand like ace king, can have in positions range just drawing stone dead. And so we see a lot of 1/3 bets, some 2/3 bets, but for the most part we're c-betting our entire range. And just to check if there is a major EV difference between a big bet and a small bet. Okay, there is for some hands like ace queen, like these kind of hands that we're just kind of betting because we have to. Hands like 9s, 10s, and jacks that we're just betting this because our range kind of gets destroyed if we start to check these. And hands like queen x, you know, we don't really bet and get called by worse too often. And we don't really fold out better too often or ever. But we're doing it because our range wants to bet we want to bet our entire range on this board. And if we don't bet jacks, then what are we, you know, balancing a checking range is pretty impossible. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. Pretty much every type of other hand really wants to bet 1/3 to 2/3. They're pretty similar, but these hands really favor a small bet, and I bet if we gave it like a 1/4 size, it would choose that, which again makes sense. So back to strategy. I would probably choose a 1/3 bet with range on this board, maybe even smaller. I think I might exploitatively split my range with like 9s, 10s, and jacks and go like 25% because I don't really want to get called, but I don't want to ruin how my range. I don't want to get messed with either. I don't want someone to float or just randomly start bluffing 3 streets because I've checked them, and just somehow get bluffed by complete error. And in position is mostly calling. They're raising 2.5% of the time, which mostly happens with ace king suited and ace king offsuit that they flatted pre at a small frequency. But for the most part, it's a pure call or a fold. And we can see that like in positions MDF versus a 1/3 bet, right, is 25% or 75%. So that they could fold 25% of their hands, but they are just completely unable to meet that, right? So a 1/3 bet is just an auto profit here, which is cool. It explains a lot. Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward. I don't really know what a dynamic card would be. I remember last time a card like a deuce was randomly slightly worse for out of position. And so here it's pretty spread out. My theory is that it's because in position had like pocket deuces and pocket fours that out of position doesn't. So like, you notice out of position has pocket fives and then the cutoff, and then this cutoff of this is the worst. Pocket fives is the worst pocket pair out of position is opening, and so fours and deuces on king 3 were way worse for out of position than in position, because in position could turn boats on those cards and out of position could not. So yeah, that's my hunch. Weirdly enough, like maybe not weirdly enough, this makes sense that we have a lot of air that's 1/3, and so when we enter this node where we get called, in position has something, right? They aren't floating too often. If we go back to what their calling range is here, they pretty much only have gut shots at worst. Like they're folding hands like sevens. I don't know if a lot of people are folding hands like sevens and sixes to a 1/3 bet. I think that might be a mistake. Interesting to note that hands like ace 3 of hearts, these wheel aces with backdoor flush draws, are calls half the time. This is probably just to meet some sort of flush frequency on the river. If it runs out diamond or club, they want to have some flushes, and this is another way to have them. But this is not something I'm doing. I wonder what the EV of calling here is. Pretty bad. So they're slightly losing to slightly winning. Pretty break even. And yeah, I would imagine that a lot of this is just to have correct bluffing frequencies down the stretch, but I think you can exploitably fold here and not meet those frequencies down on turns and rivers, just kind of save some chips here. But that's interesting to note. But the idea here is that when out of position bets and gets called, in position has a hand that has a lot of equity, right? And you can see that once we get called on the flop, we now go from 60% equity to 49% equity, because all of our air is drawing pretty dead to in position's range. And hands like eights are also in trouble. These wheel aces are pretty stone dead. Not stone dead, but they have 20% equity against an entire range, which is pretty weak. And so yeah, we've really run into a strong portion of the range, and so double barreling with air becomes really tough and not really great. And we're really going to struggle to realize out of our equity when we have these bad hands, right? Because now our EV is less than half the pot, whereas on the flop it was 2/3 of the pot. So this is really just a bet your air for 1/3 on the flop and then shut down once you get called, because in position is not folding. So that's good to know. On a total brick, what are our bluffs? What do we do with something like ace-jack? Ace-jack with a club makes sense. We're going to rep clubs on the river when they get there. We have a gutter. We block some strong hands. Yeah, and it looks like I can't tell if the spade is valuable, unblocking hands that have backdoor flush draw floats. that will now just fold the turn. It looks like slightly, if they have Jack 10 of diamonds, having the Jack of diamonds for us is worse than having the Jack of spades, because now they're just going to fold. And so we see a hand like, well, I can't scroll over it, but we see a hand like Ace of diamonds, Jack of hearts, which has 2 backdoor flush draws on the flop. Or, if they have Ace 10 of hearts or Ace Jack of diamonds, they'd have 2 backdoor flush draws on the flop. And blocking those hands means that they're going to fold less on the turn when a heart or a diamond doesn't turn, right? So they don't pick up a flush draw with those hands, and so we'd want them to have them on this turn so that they fold. That was a pretty complex way of saying that we want to unblock their folding range, which is a common theme in solvers, and I imagine these suited aces are pretty much check giving up unless we've turned a flush draw, and we're betting pretty big. I do wonder if we give it an overbet size, if we'd start overbetting here. Same with Jack 10 and Jack 9. And again, when we unblock their backdoor flush draw floats, like Jack 9 of spades, because we don't have a heart, club, or a diamond in our hand, we go for it more than Jack 9 of hearts or Jack 9 of diamonds, because we block those floats, and so their folding range on this turn is smaller. So that's an interesting tidbit. I wonder what the EV of these hands is and how different that is. Honestly, it's pretty large. It's about a chip, which is okay. Now it not that huge, but Jack 9 of hearts, bat 100 is 7.59. Jack 9 of spades is 9.63. So about 2 chips, about 1.6% of the pot, 1/60th. That's valuable, right? That's valuable to think about and know. But these are minor things, and so I guess a good way to test this is if this 2 of clubs became the 2 of diamonds, or if this queen of diamonds was the queen of spades, right? We would start bluffing with Jack 9 of diamonds now, right? Because we, again, unblock those backdoor flush draw floats. So that's interesting to know. I'm going to run this out to the river and see what we bluff river with when the backdoor flush draw misses. And here we can just kind of see just how strong in positions range is. There's really nothing here that doesn't have showdown value. And again, no raises. Or 1% of raises with ace-king that probably called flop. So let's see a complete break like the 4 of hearts. We are really going for it with backdoor flush draw aces. And honestly, that looks like that's it. Sometimes Jack 10, sometimes Jack 9. Jack 9 of spades, again, important. 10 9 of spades, again, that's important. But yeah, that's, you kind of want to block their turn flush draws. Yeah, but yeah, we really don't have many bluffs on this river. And if this came the 4 of clubs to complete the flush, we saw this with the last board, we kind of are bluffing for 1/3 or value betting for 1/3. And our bluffs are what? Very little. And that's probably why we're betting 1/3. 10-9? Nope. Not really. Pocket 6s. Okay. Pocket 5s. Okay. This is where we pull our bluffs from, because we really don't have many on this river. Jack 10 gives up, but these hands start to fire. Interesting. But this is a pretty, line frequency, 3.43% of the time that we get this run out. So that's almost never. But that's just something to think about. Now, let's go to the two-tone board. Did I kill it? Nope, okay. So, same board except two-tone. Again, we saw this with the last board too. We're betting 1/3 more often. We still have some big bets, but EVs are going to be quite similar. And you'll notice that like 5s without the club are actually betting big. And so I guess they're just instantly saying, all right, I have to turn myself into a bluff. Not something I'm doing, not something I'm sure how I feel about doing against population, but obviously if you showed me a hand history where you did this, I couldn't say you're wrong because Pile says it's good. So how bad could it be? All right. Again, betting 1/3, there's almost no raises. So let's call, and then let's give it the 2 of clubs when the flush turns. See this a lot. When the flush comes in, out of position checks very frequently. It's going to be betting, I'm going to assume, ace-king type hands with the ace of clubs, king x hands with a club, and checking the rest. So yeah, so it still is betting king x pretty frequently, but almost always with the ace of clubs. If we go to like king jack offsuit, still betting trips frequently, but obviously more frequently with a club. And things like king queen that are flopped boats. You remember we do bet it. We do bet those on the flops. We're not slow playing those, but these turn into majority checks. But obviously not always. About 2/3 of the time. So let's check and let's see what in position strategy is. Again, a lot of 1/3ing. I think this might be a mistake I'm making. And maybe it might be a population adjustment where I'm betting bigger when I have a flush here. But really all we need is 1/3. This is just such a bad card for out of position. Our range is so strong once we've called the flop. We don't really have many bluffs. We have like Jack 10 and 10-9, and that is pretty much it. And Jack 9 suited. But that's pretty much our only bluffs. We have some random gutters, but they choose to check. Okay, and then this is why we're calling like our ace-x with backdoor flush draws so that we can bluff on these cards. Okay, that makes sense. So when we bet small, do we have any raises? It looks like we're check raising king queen. We're check raising king x without a club. Weird to me. I don't quite get that one. And then these hands like pocket 6s, pocket 7s, turning themselves into bluffs. I'm actually surprised to see a 10% raise. I wouldn't think we're raising that often, but hey, we are. So let's say we call. Oh, actually, let's do this first. That's not what I wanted. I want to choose the river or choose a turn and then see EV comparison. So yeah, we'll notice that clubs are really bad for us. EV wise, really bad for us. Notice also 9x is bad, including Jack 10. Just kind of a tidbit. But ace-x is very good for us, especially in offsuit ace. That should also make sense. So yeah, we'll check, call a 1/3 bet, and then see how the river plays out. Let's just say it's nothing. We're always checking to the better. And then what are their bluffs? I'm going to assume this is ace-x of hearts that had backdoor flush draw on the flop and is now choosing to bluff. If you squint real hard, let me undo this. So yeah, we really don't have these ace-6. I'm pointing at my screen. I don't know why. We really don't have these ace-6 of spades, ace-6 of diamond type hands ever. But what happens if I do this? That's not anything. What happens if I do this? That's not anything. But when we do, we turn these into bluffs. 7-8. We only have club versions. Again, it's, well, 5 is a boat now, but it's these pocket pairs with a club. And this is why, So these turn themselves into bluffs, and I'm wondering, this might be an interesting difference we can see between the, okay, so this is a difference that we see between the rainbow and the two-tone board, is that these pocket pairs with the backdoor flush draw become calls because we're going to turn them into bluffs on 3-door flush runouts. That's interesting. Our range is just so strong on these types of boards that we need to find some bluffs on flush turns. And this is where we draw from. That's cool. That's something I wouldn't have guessed. But that makes sense. I think this is an interesting board. I don't think there's a whole lot that I'm doing differently than population, other than maybe some small bet sizing things. But this is a cool way to think about it, and knowing that when we get called with air, we just kind of shut down. We're screwed. And so, yeah, the node lock that I have for this board, since I did the raising trips in position, since I said last sim I did the node lock as trip in position as raising trips, we already kind of know how that one plays out with some flop 3 betting, blocking the strongest trips. This time I did where out of position, the under the gun player is not c-betting their whole range, and they are checking hands that are weaker showdown value. So I think I have seen this from regs before, where if they have a hand like jacks, they're not going to c-bet, right? Because they think, I'm not getting called by anything worse, and nothing better is folding. Which is true, right? When you first learn poker, and you kind of take that step to like, okay, when you kind of take that step to profitability, right, where you start winning money at poker, you think, okay, why am I betting? If I'm bluffing, it's to fold out better. If I'm value betting, it's to get called by worse. And jacks and 10s and 9s, they don't do any of that, right? Like jacks is never getting called, never folding out. It's never folding out a queen, and it's never getting. I mean, I guess it's kind of getting called by worse sometimes, but I think a lot of weaker players, when they first learn how to play poker well, they think along those lines, and you see a lot of kind of okay regs and kind of okay recreationals think about that. And then when you start studying solvers, you have to think about your range, because when you check a hand like jacks, what are you saying? What are you saying your checking range is on this board, right? It becomes very tough to check a good hand because you're c-betting all of your air super easily, right? This is brainless, 1/3 pot, boom, take down the pot so often. But like a queen, or jacks or 10s, people tend to check those more often than they should. And so that's kind of the strategy that I've given as a node lock here. And I don't remember the out of position EV, it was over 50, it was like 55. But now it is significantly worse. It's another one of those where you lose like 10% of the pot by just playing like a bad reg, like, where you're not thinking about your range, you're just thinking about your hand in a vacuum. And so we'll take a look at what starts to happen when we check. Let's say we have jacks, no club. Fair enough? Fair enough. Boom. We start to see some overbets because we have capped our range. The idea here is that I don't expect out of position or the under the gun player to check a king or a very strong hand here that often. And so when you have a capped, unprotected range, unprotected as in they don't have strong hands here, they only have middling to weak hands, you start to attack them with overbets. And so what are our overbets? Are ace X combos that just need to start swinging themselves into bluffs. Our lower pocket pairs. That's weird to me. I would much rather do this with Jack 10, 10-9, or Jack 9. But pocket fours, absolutely. Start betting 2x pot, 150% pot. Fours without a club, by the way. And I guess having the club is important for later streets. And probably Pio probably thinks too good to bet fold here, strangely enough. And we start to see Jack 10 of clubs starts to become an overbet. 10-9 starts to become an overbet. 10-9 no flush draw becomes kind of a big bet or a check. But one thing to notice is without the capped range, when you see that 1/3 on the flop, in position, on turns, gets to bet 1/3 a lot on a lot of turns. But here, once you check, in position does almost no small betting. Your range is so weak that it's either trying to polarize to a really good hand or it's getting you to fold those really, really weak hands. And so I don't know how valuable it is to run out the turn and river here, because this is the takeaway that I have here, is that you see a lot of regs that are winning money that kind of get it, but are only thinking about their hand in a vacuum and not as a range. And so they will check a hand like jacks or tens, and how you attack that, their capped checking range, is by overbetting anything and everything that could be considered a bluff. And so we'll note that the worst pocket pair under the gun has is pocket fives, and so fives start to check pretty often. But once you get into a spot where you're like, okay, they never check worse, you start to overbet. And that is the important thing. But you're also giving up with these like just zero equity 6-7 of hearts type hands, 6-7 of spades type hand. You're just like, all right, you can have it, man. But yeah, that's a sim. Making good progress on these, and hopefully have another one for tomorrow.